Now, normally when you see me here on YouTube, you'll see short takes, and those happen to be those recordings I make for TikTok. And then I put them on YouTube, and you get a sense about what I'm talking about. You give me great responses, and it's wonderful. You may also know that I have a podcast, which is strictly audio. Goes about an hour every night. Very easy to find. Go to rationalboomer.com. But I've had people coming to me and saying, you should do the podcast in a video format. And frankly, I don't want to do that. I like the audio format for the long podcast because I think a lot of people will listen when they're driving, when they're working, whatever they're doing. They're doing something else other than sitting in front of a computer screen. Now, that said, enough people have asked me to do it. So I thought, what the fuck? I mean, there's only three kinds of people that can ask me to do something, and I will actually do it. Number one is my wife. Number two is my granddaughter. Number three is any of you that take the time out of your day to listen to the things I say. That is the least I can do for you. So what I decided to do is I'm not going to do the podcast in a video format. TikTok is TikTok. They're just shorter form. I'm going to do something different, kind of a video podcast, but it's shorter, 20 to 30 minutes, maybe, depending on how this all works out. I don't really know. And we'll see how it works. We'll see how you like it. We'll see if you actually sit down and watch something for 20 or 30 minutes. We'll see. It's a test. If you like it, I'll keep doing it. If you don't, fuck it. I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. Now, keep in mind, the other things that I do, I'm not stopping doing those. I'm just adding this, and I want to see how it works out. So let's talk about some of the things that happened today and yesterday. There's a lot of interesting things going on in our country with our politics. I say that we always can expect something crazy, something unbelievable to happen almost every week, and that's exactly what normally occurs. We know that we've been waiting for Judge Aileen Cannon in Florida to give us a date when they would start the classified documents trial. Now, we know that Jack Smith wanted to start in December. He felt like that was enough time for people to get ready. And then, of course, Donald Trump's team comes in and says, let's make it indefinite. Maybe not even do it at all. But if you are going to do it, it should be after the 2024 election because our Donnie, he's busy. He's running for president. He should get special treatment. So when they got together for a pretrial hearing, they were talking about how to deal with classified documents. And then, of course, they decided to talk about the scheduling too. And we thought that they may come up with a start date at that pretrial hearing, but they didn't. Aileen Cannon said, I'll come up with an actual date. I'll put it in writing and I'll do it pretty quickly. Well, she was true to her word. She did do it quickly. And she put out yesterday, or let's just say Friday, I don't know when you're watching this, that the start of the trial should be May 20th, 2024. And she did exactly what I thought she would do. She didn't want to go full Donald Trump because she got spanked by the 11th Circuit last time she did that. And she didn't want to go in favor of Jack Smith either. So she split it down the middle. And she set the court case for May. Now, keep in mind, everybody's worried about these court cases going beyond the election. We're going to have as many as maybe 4 or 5 different trials going on. Some of them are going to go past the 2024 election, but I don't want you to worry about it. It really doesn't matter. Now, when this court case starts, May 20th, it'll be 6 months out from the election. The case should take maybe 30, 45 days, something like that. So there's plenty of time before the election. Now, that said, as we get closer to May 20th, 2024, that's not to say that Donald Trump's team will come up with other excuses to delay it a little bit at a time. We need another month. We need another 2 months. And theoretically, if she allowed this to happen, it could go past the 2024 election. Now, what you have to understand is that Jack Smith knows about this shit. He understands it. He planned for it. So what does he do? He comes up with yet another potential indictment, imminent indictment, and that is regarding the January 6th insurrection. While she was waiting, contemplating when she is going to start this trial for the classified documents, he comes out with a target letter, and we find out, like I say, the indictments for January 6th are imminent. That was basically a message to Aileen Cannon. Like, you go ahead and fuck around because I don't need you. I got this other thing going in Washington, D.C. And guess what? In D.C., Donald Trump's not going to have any favorable judges or jury members. They don't like them in Washington, D.C. So you go ahead and fuck around, Aileen, because we got bigger stuff to deal with. Now, that's not to say he won't go up against Aileen Cannon, that he's just pushing it aside and doesn't care, because we know that there are more indictments coming for the classified documents case. We'd heard as many as 30 to 45 more, but now we have the January 6th imminent. I thought it might have happened Friday, the way they were talking, and the fact that they gave Donald Trump 4 days to step in front of the grand jury, which he wasn't going to do. And I thought maybe Friday would be the day that the indictments would go out, and that didn't happen. Now, it could be Monday or Tuesday. Some other people have said, the last time he did this with the target letter took like 3 weeks. That's not going to happen, because we know that Fani Willis in Georgia is going to be coming out with indictments in the first or second week of August. And the federal government always likes to be first when there are similar charges. And these two potential indictments, the state and the federal indictment, do overlap quite a bit because it's about the same thing. What Jack Smith is doing doesn't necessarily have just to do with the attack on the Capitol. They're talking about fake electors, the coercing of secretaries of state by Donald Trump, by Lindsey Graham, by Rudy Giuliani, by Mark Meadows. So they are going to overlap a bit. And what's interesting about this Georgia thing, everybody that gets indicted by Fani Willis, they're also at risk of getting indicted by the federal government as well. So the next few weeks, when these two things pop off, it is going to be an absolute shit show. You thought it was crazy when they indicted him for the classified documents. This ain't nothing. Now, I want to warn you about the indictments that come out with the January 6th insurrection investigations. We are presuming there are going to be a lot of people indicted, because there were a lot of working pieces to this whole thing, not just Donald Trump, not just his administration, but outside help with friends like Ginny Thomas and Roger Stone, not to mention sitting members of Congress. But what may happen here is the indictment will come out. Donald Trump will certainly be indicted, maybe a couple of other people. And then people will say, oh my God, they're not indicting anybody else. Just hold on. We know that there are superseding indictments in the classified documents case, and you can expect much of the same with regards to the January 6th insurrection thing. So they might come out with a set of indictments right off the bat, and then more that would encompass sitting members of Congress, Ginny Thomas, Rudy Giuliani, what have you. Now, Rudy Giuliani said something. He was interviewed. He said, did you flip on Donald Trump? He said, no. Then he said, I don't think I'm going to be indicted in this January 6th thing by Jack Smith. Well, those are two clear lies, because we know that Rudy Giuliani was, in fact, sent a target letter from Georgia for this very same situation. So to think that Jack Smith has just missed the boat on Rudy Giuliani, I fail to see that as a possibility. Now, the point where he says, I didn't flip on Donald Trump. Well, that's interesting, because he did testify in front of the grand jury in something called a proffer. Now, the only reason to have a proffer is it's an audition to see if you have enough stuff where they might give you a little bit of immunity to talk to the courts when it finally goes to trial. Now, it could be he didn't say enough and they said, fuck yourself, you get no immunity. But if they said that, they're certainly going to indict him because he was in the thick of it. He was largely responsible for what happened. He was kind of the lead man into this. He's the one that started it off. He's the one that came up with all these conspiracy theories. So to think that Jack Smith isn't going to indict him, well, that's fucking ridiculous. Even if he did bail on Donald Trump, he's not going to get off scot-free. It's going to be like a Mark Meadows thing. And with Mark Meadows, he's not getting off scot-free either. He's getting a limited amount of punishment, but he's going to have to plead guilty to his crimes. He will still be sentenced, but it'll be less than had he not given up the ghost about Donald Trump. Now, with Donald Trump ultimately or imminently being indicted by Georgia and Fani Willis in Fulton County, this is interesting. Something came out on Friday that should have Donald Trump shaking in his boots, should have him very worried about what's going on in Georgia. Apparently, there is talk or some leaks coming out of Georgia that that Fani Willis is going to be charging some RICO charges, racketeering, and that there might be as many as 12 to 15 other indictments and other people involved in this. Well, that's a little frightening. And then the fact is, if Fani Willis is doing this, you can bet Jack Smith is probably in that deep too. We always heard tell of these RICO charges that might be coming from Georgia. Now it seems like they're imminent too. And these are even more damning than some of the charges we saw with the classified documents. RICO is some serious shit. So I think once he gets hit with some of these RICO charges, we should refer to him, one of the nicknames like Donald Trump is famous for, we should call Donnie Rico Suave. Now, if you're old, you remember where that came from. If you're young, Google that shit, and then you'll figure it out. Well, Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa, this motherfucker's prehistoric. And I said this in TikTok, that people will give me a hard time because you're age shaming him. No, seriously, this motherfucker was backup quarterback behind the Flintstones, Fred Flintstone, when he was in high school. Look it up. It's in the yearbooks. But I say that because of just the unadulterated bullshit that Chuck Grassley and other people in the Senate are trying to push. On Thursday, Chuck Grassley released a confidential FBI informant's unverified claim that years ago, the Biden family pushed a Ukrainian oligarch to pay them $10 million. Now, none of this has been proved. And if you talk to the Republicans, they're acting like this is absolute proof. And what you need to know is what they're looking at is not proof at all. It's basically a tip sheet. Now, you'll remember this document because the Republicans, Marjorie Taylor Greene specifically, was wanting to have this thing released so people could see it. Blow the roof off the place, or so she thought. When they weren't willing to do that, they allowed the Republicans in to see this document. So what does Marjorie Taylor Greene do? She takes notes, and then she comes back and reads them in Congress on television, on the news. That is highly illegal. They had to go see this thing in a skiff. She had no business exposing classified documents any more than Donald Trump did. So she should have had a problem there, but for whatever reason, they chose not to pursue it and not to indict her for a clear crime. But what you have to understand about this FD 1023 As I said, it's a tip sheet. Now, this sheet came in under the Trump administration and went to the FBI. There's an informant who they don't name, says that he heard from the CEO of Burisma that Hunter and Joe Biden both got $5 million in a bribe. So this isn't evidence, this is hearsay. And you have to question who this informant is, because what's weird about it was that as soon as that was turned in to the FBI, then Rudy Giuliani was squawking about the very same situation, talking about, oh, this evidence, we're going to blow the roof out of it. So somehow Rudy Giuliani, who wasn't working for the FBI at that time or ever, somehow knew about this document when it was submitted to the FBI. Now, here's the interesting thing. It was submitted to the FBI under the Trump administration. This was some time back. They went through it and they said, yeah, there's nothing to this. It's just a tip sheet. They get these tip sheets all the time. 95 or 99% of them, they don't follow up because there is no evidence or it's not legitimate. There's no credibility. And that's how the Trump FBI saw this particular sheet. So now Chuck Grassley, not having anything else to go after Donald Trump over, or not Donald Trump, Joe Biden over, they've got to do what Republicans do all the time. They simply try to smear Joe Biden. They have no facts. They have no truth. They have no law. So all they have to do is try to make noise and hope that it will hurt Joe Biden. Well, we've been seeing them do that in the House of Representatives ever since they got the slim majority, hearing after hearing, and every one of them has been a joke. And every time they are embarrassed, Democrats sit back and take pot shots and embarrass them through the whole thing. And that's the case with this particular document. It's nothing. It's not evidence. It's just somebody saying that they heard from somebody else that this happened. Now, the Republicans are trying to play this like, oh my God, it's blowing the roof off everything, but it's not. This isn't even new. This is something we've been talking about for quite a while, and still they have no evidence. Their attitude about it is, yeah, we don't have evidence yet, but it sounds suspicious. We need to look into it. We need to know why the FBI didn't look into it. Well, the FBI didn't look into it because there was nothing to it. It wasn't legitimate. It wasn't credible. That's what the FBI does with these tips. Most of these tips get thrown in the waste can. But the Republicans held on to this because they needed something. And it just goes to show how fucking lame they are. I mean, if that's all you got, Joe's been in office for 2.5 years, and that's the best you can do is go back in time during the Trump administration, dust off some phony fucking tip sheet and act like that's something. That's the best you've got. Well, I'd hate to be on your team because you're not going to fucking win. You're going to lose. You know, I talk to a lot of young people, and they're troubled by the things that we are seeing now. They're troubled with the divisiveness, the stress everybody is under, seeing all these things happening in our government and in our country. And some of them have said to me, you know, this has to be the worst time in our history as far as the government goes, as far as the divisiveness. And I have to tell them, you know, you're young, so you don't remember this. You weren't around for this. But for me, I would have to believe that the 60s were worse than what we're seeing now. I mean, the things the government was doing back then weren't quite as much in the open, weren't as egregious as what we're seeing now. But that was a tumultuous decade. You think about it, we had the Vietnam War. We had 4 major assassinations: MLK, Malcolm X, Robert F. Kennedy, and John F. Kennedy, all in one decade. That all happened. And we had something back then that we don't have now. And it was huge, to be perfectly honest with you, as far as how society was handling the situation. Because people were so upset about what the government was doing and not listening to the people in this country, we had a lot of civil unrest. We had a lot of protest for civil rights, protest against the war, protest for women's rights. A lot of these turned into riots. I remember being a young child sitting on my couch, maybe 7, 8 years old. I'm watching TV. I'm crying, and my mom comes in and says, "What are you crying about?" And I point to the TV and I say, "I don't want to go to college." She says, "What do you mean?" And what I was watching was a riot on the news at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and it was particularly violent. And in my 7-year-old mind, all I thought was, you go to college, you have to deal with this shit, and I don't want to deal with this shit. But there was a lot of that going on, and if you're old enough, you remember it got to the point where National Guard troops actually shot and killed 4 students on Kent State. I mean, it was tumultuous during the 60s. We had race riots. We had all kinds of protests. Seemed like every day there were protests. And that's not something we're seeing now, but I'm afraid that we may be on the verge of that. When people feel like their government isn't doing what they want them to do, there's going to come a point where people just get angry and they start pushing back. And that's when we had the protests that ultimately turn into riots. And I'm hoping against hope that doesn't come. But let's talk about some of the things that the government is doing that is just the opposite of what the people in this country want. Take Alabama, for example. On Friday, they refused to create a second majority Black congressional district, a move that could defy a recent order in the U.S. Supreme Court to give minority voters a greater voice and trigger a renewed battle over the state's political map. Now, lawmakers in the Republican-dominated House and Senate instead passed a plan that would increase the percentage of Black voters from about 31 to 40% in the state's second district. The map was proposed as a compromise between plans that had 42% and 38% respectively. So we know these red states, particularly Alabama, they will gerrymander the fuck out of the state to marginalize and diminish and disenfranchise people of color. They do it all the fucking time. So when they were trying to do it in this last session, somebody sued them, and it went up the court chain all the way to the Supreme Court, just like the Republicans do. And the Supreme Court says, no, you can't do that. You got to change it back to where there's 2 congressional districts. Alabama, the Governor Ivey and the legislature said, fuck that. We're going to do it our way. Now, I know the Supreme Court has its credibility problems, but generally it's in the favor of the Republican Party. That's how troublesome they are. In this particular case, they found in favor of those people that are right, people of color, and they deserve to have this done. But still, Alabama says, fuck you, we're going to do it our way. We're going to marginalize people of color. This has got to rile some people up. I mean, when our governments don't comply with the law, they're going rogue. And eventually people are going to get pissed off about it. But it's not just that. You've got states like Florida and Texas and Alabama that institute abortion bans, even though the majority of the people in their states support Roe v. Wade. Think about that. We're going to have abortion bans, even though all of you, the majority of the people in the state, don't want it. We're going to shove it down your throat. At some point, that's going to piss people off. It's going to affect enough people where you've got people rising up and saying, fuck this. We also have states banning books and whitewashing the history of slavery. They're trying to tell people or tell schools and teachers that you can talk about slavery, but you have to put it in positive terms, meaning, some of these slaves, they learned some valuable skills and trades. It wasn't so bad for them. Well, fuck that. You and I both know it was absolutely abhorrent. It should never have happened, and we should be embarrassed about it. These Republicans are worried that little white kids will feel ashamed. Well, they won't feel ashamed, but they will be ashamed of their ancestors, and they should be. We should all know what was true, what really happened, so it doesn't happen again. But I can't say that Republicans and Trump-a-fucks don't want it to happen again. I know that sounds pretty far-fetched, but I'll guarantee if given the opportunity, they'd be happy to jump back into the slavery issue. And then there's the people dying by the hundreds in these mass shootings. A lot of these states, anybody, anywhere can have as many guns as they want and do whatever they want. And unfortunately, we're getting mass shootings at minimum every day, and people are dying. Yet the majority of people in most states want some gun regulations. The police want gun regulations to stop this crazy shit. But once again, the Republicans decide to shove down your throat what they want, and they don't care what the people want. So what do you think that's going to do? We saw the protest, we saw the riots, we saw the upheaval in the 1960s. We're not seeing it now, but how much more has to happen with our government shoving laws that we don't like down our throat, or not instituting laws that we think should be there? This is supposed to be a democracy. We, the people, are supposed to be able to vote for our representatives, and they're supposed to do our bidding, but they're not. So how long are they going to be able to do that? I don't know. And I hope we don't see any kind of upheaval. I hope we don't see any kind of protest or riots. But if you ever wanted to put a country in a position to have to do something like that, well, we might be looking at it now. So I'm going to wrap things up for this one. This is a test to see how it's going. And chances are I'll do it again until we see how people feel about it. Thanks for joining me. This is kind of the Rational Boomer podcast, the Rational Boomer video podcast, if you will. Hope you have a great day. We'll talk to you again soon.